Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from the Superhero Ethics Podcast.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 59, which begins with Thor stumbling towards the hammer and ends with Thor letting go of the hammer he can't pick up. Joining us on the show today, we have Andrew Dorowski, host of the Disney Animation Minute Essentials, and Joe Dorowski, host of the Protagonist Podcast. And to both of you gentlemen, it's Thursday. Happy Thursday. We always, every Thursday, we ask people, what is your favorite all-time Thor moment? And it can be from comic books, it can be from these movies, it can be from a cereal box you saw him on once. Like, what's just to you the quintessential Thor moment?
Does it have to be Thor himself?
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't have to be Thor himself, it's going to be something with Beta Ray Bill.
Nice.
Because that's what I think of for like classic Thor stories is like Thor and Beta Ray Bill together, either fighting or fighting alongside each other. So it's going to be hard for me to think of something other than that. I love Beta Ray Bill.
Okay, sure. What about you, Jeff?
I think it's probably going to be a Walt Simonson cover with Thor, with the hammer smashing down. There's probably one with it through the Mighty Thor logo. Like it's breaking because Mjolnir has come down. Just one of those Walt Simonson splash pages. Jack Kirby did a lot of dynamic art, and he's, the one that introduced this version of Thor into the Marvel Universe and everything. But Simonson, for me, is really what feels right for Thor.
Awesome. Well, the connection between Thor and that hammer is something we will definitely be discussing in just one moment.
We do have a merch store. If you like the show art with Matthew and I flying through the Bifrost, head over to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and click on merch. It'll take you right to our TeePublic store, and you can see all the stuff we have with our logo.
For these 5 minutes, but also for the movie, like this is kind of the quintessential moment we've been building up to. So we'll hit the things that happen during this minute, but I think let's just dive into the whole minute. Because you all wanted to talk about this, so here we are. What is the significance of this minute of seeing Thor triumphantly coming to the hammer? The music is swelling, everyone's watching him, and then he just can't pick it up.
Like heroes' journeys always have, the low point, right? The hero has to be brought down to a low point so they can build back up and they can have the discovery, all of that stuff. And so often that low point is someone dying, right? It's Uncle Ben dying. Right. It's the mentor dying. And that's the point where the hero has to say, oh, I have to step up. I have to change something. I have to fulfill this role because Obi-Wan Kenobi's gone. And you have those, sad Luke Skywalker funeral moments. And I kind of love that this one's not a funeral.
Yeah.
It's kind of a relief because so often it's the funeral. And so that's kind of a great moment for me where his ultimate failure is not that someone else died. It's not that his mentor is gone. It's not that he's alone. It's that, no, you really aren't what you thought you were, right? You can't be what you thought you were. You have to re-examine yourself for yourself. And it's not because someone isn't there for you. It's not because, someone's gone. No, you just got to look yourself straight in the eyes and figure out what's going on.
Right.
I love how this is a really good example of the big absurd aspects of superhero storytelling revealing something really internal, right? Like the idea that there's this magical hammer that you can only pick up if you're worthy. Like that's really kind of absurd. But through a nice blend of Branagh's directing, Hemsworth's performance, the score, everything comes together to make us feel something for Thor and his sense of failure and his sense of disbelief and his, this reckoning that he now actually has to come about. That is through this kind of absurd dynamic of, that's been invented for superhero comic books.
Yeah. I think it's so true. I mean, one thing we've talked about a lot on this podcast before is that, most people have never had a moment where they're no longer going to get to be king, but they've probably had a moment where they disappointed their parents, you know, or like where they've fought with their sibling because someone was jealous of the other. Like there's so much about it that is taking these great stories and making it still relatable. And I think, for me, I think one of the reasons why this is so interesting, and you're right, Andrew, is so different than the normal version of that, like the Abyss from the Joe Campbell idea, is that on some level, Thor hit his low point 10 minutes into the movie. It's just that, because, 10 minutes into the movie, Odin declared, Thor, you cannot be king, you are not worthy, and I'm stripping you of your power, and I'm stripping you of Mjolnir. And to some extent, like, all that's really happened, like, this isn't the sort of thing where, like, bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happens to our character, our hero. This is more like he's kind of the Wile E. Coyote who's been running out for 10 feet and only now finally looks down and realizes, like, actually, this isn't going to work, And to me, there's something really brilliant about that, in that we, the audience, have known that he's been kicked out, but we've been watching for the last 45 minutes him, like, either just not knowing or trying to live in denial. And I think it's such a great way to structure this, of, especially because he's, to take those kind of ideas, his tragic flaw is his arrogance and is his inability to sort of hear things, And so it's just that, like, Odin gave him that devastating speech and he didn't hear a word of it until this moment.
Well, what I love about it is, like, we're really getting this thing with this Thor in this place where, I mean, I don't think he gets it, and that's what I think is so interesting is, like, I mean, he looks up into the sky and is screaming because, I mean, the last communication he really had with his dad was when he said, you are unworthy of your title, of all of these different things, as he kind of stripped him of his rank and he banished him, and that was it. And, and so he's down here and, I mean, he's like hollering at the heavens and he's not really hollering yet, but he's just like, he's screaming as like that intense moan as he's trying to pull this thing out. And it's, I think that it kind of breaks his brain a little bit. Like, he just really doesn't know what's happening right now. And I don't think, in the next minute, we'll certainly talk more about it in the next few minutes and really start exploring, like, at what point does he start realizing, like, what's going on? Because I mean, the moment that he heard that something else had landed out in the desert and it was, something really heavy we couldn't pick up, like, he was so cocky and arrogant, like, oh, I know exactly what that is. I'm just going to head over there, and Dad threw it over there and he dropped it here for me. Like, he never has had a thought this whole time from the moment he was banished. It all was about this thing where it's just a little punishment. It's a slap on the wrist. I just got to, follow the breadcrumbs that Dad left me to get to Mjolnir, and then I can go home. And he's at that moment now. And he's finally, all of a sudden, for the very first time, something isn't right.
I like how you said it broke his brain, because you really do get a sense that something has gone so far beyond Thor's conception of what his reality is, or his sense of identity is, that he can't function anymore.
Yeah.
Again, this is something that is, like, fantastical and superhero, but also incredibly relatable. I think we've all seen the moment on TV or in film, and probably many of us have also had it in our own life, where, like, there's something that, there's a piece of news that the character or ourselves is presented with, and we're like, no, we're not quite ready to believe it. And so we create one sort of, like, I'm sure they're just stuck in traffic. I'm sure their cell phone died. That's why they didn't call, like, whatever it is. And you get to watch the character, like, holding on to that because it's their only last hope. And then when that moment comes where that is taken away, where it's like, like you said, like, he's hoping, like, yeah, Odin didn't really mean it. I'll have the hammer back. And all he's thought about is getting to the hammer, because then he doesn't have to think about the things Odin said to him. Mm-hmm. But this is that moment where it's like, no, actually, he meant it, and I'm screwed.
Yeah, and it's like it slams into him so immediately. Like, at no point has he had any fear, right? He hasn't even thought about any kind of significance to consequences or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, he slams completely past the point where, like, the thing he should have been worried about has happened. He's like, I wasn't even worried about this. What is this? This is, and he just has nothing, right? Because he hasn't been
Right.
thinking about it. He hasn't been considering it. And so it really is like one of those catastrophic things where he had no concept of this negative possibility. And then it's immediately the reality, right? It goes from impossible to reality, and he has just no understanding for what that's supposed to mean. And of course that gets cleared up, and it gets narrated, falsely by Loki later on, into something, and he has to learn to accept it that way. And that's part of like his whole journey. But in this moment, he's like, no, I have nothing. Like, there is no reality to me right now because I had not conceived of this.
Yeah.
I do think it's worth noting in all our discussion of this 1 minute of film that I think Chris Hemsworth worked out in preparation for this scene.
Oh gosh.
Oh yeah.
It's fantastic.
I'm watching that scene and I was thinking, like, the director realized there are a part of the audience who's really going to want to see his struggle. And there's a part of the audience who's going to want to watch his rain-drenched body, muscles like popping in his arms. Let's give them both what they want. It's kind of the setup for the holding the helicopter moment where half of us are like, oh, that's so, he's trying so hard. And half of us, or myself included, like, oh, God, look at his arm muscles. Like the director knew what they were doing. The camera shot knew what they were doing there.
Mm-hmm. And the music's really great. Like the direction's really great. As you guys said, Chris Hemsworth is really great. Also, like, he really looks like the strongest man in the world in this.
Yeah.
Like the way he's lifting it and everything. And then, we cut from Dutch angle to Dutch angle to Dutch angle throughout it. Which is again kind of saying like, okay, like he is not in line with reality. Right. He's not square with what's going on.
Well, I have to ask a question because this gets into the music. Often, like with a big reveal in a movie, I feel like it's been so telegraphed, it's been so troped, it loses effect. I have to say, with both the kind of triumphant music we were hearing, with Hawkeye saying, like, boss, I'm rooting for this guy now, I honestly believed he was going to be able to lift the hammer. And then we were going to have, like, the whole second half of the movie was about him trying to, like, fight his way back. And am I alone in that, or did anyone else have that kind of, like, there's a part of you that thought maybe he's actually going to be able to do this, until, of course, he couldn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I remembered my brain from 2011 and when I first saw this, like, what was I thinking? Was I thinking that he would be able to pull it up and everything would be at least good on Midgard, and then that would take us into the other half of the film? I suppose that I could have seen that happening, but as soon as he doesn't, it just makes so much sense because it fits what they need to do with the story. Is like, oh, of course he can't do it. And I suppose it's all in the whisper that Odin, the whispery spell that Odin cast on Mjolnir before he threw it through the Bifrost. That whole idea of being worthy, and that it's great that you found it, but you still need to prove it. And I think that's the whole key that we get here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't quite remember, but while like I can kind of imagine, like you say, like a version where he's now got the power of Thor, and it's about him, getting his way back to Asgard is what the final act is, or I mean, not final act, but the rest of the movie is. It really does feel right, that if he's going to prove himself worthy is the key thing. Like, even with a little more time, it maybe feels a little abbreviated that, it takes a weekend to prove yourself worthy of the power of a god, maybe a little longer to do that. But if it had already been, had already happened, it really would have been too quick.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that's kind of for me, that's why I remember it so well, because I hadn't read Thor in the comic books. I liked Thor in the Avengers movie, which is why I wanted to watch this movie. But even then, I went into it very skeptical. I was like, this is going to be some ridiculous comic book about a superpowered guy. And so when I watched it, I was like, I was rooting for him because I was caught up in it. But I was also like, you know what? I wish they really would tell a story about him not being worthy, but clearly that's not the story. Oh, okay. That is the story we're telling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm impressed. Yeah. Like that's why it stuck out for me, because I just, and maybe it's just my own kind of like, biases going into it. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's
and
nice,
I think that there's probably, I have to imagine Branagh did that intentionally, because just that music moment of, a hero moment about to achieve something, and then just that bass note that comes in.
It really is well done. The music, the score in this moment.
Yeah, Patrick Doyle, like just the Thor theme already has such like power and pride and strength in it. And then, and when he sees Mjolnir and it kicks in again and we have that kind of like, oh, there's the theme and everything's going to go great. And then it shifts into that minor key and that those deeper notes. It's just like, yeah, I mean, this is why, Branagh uses Patrick Doyle on all of his projects because, they work so well together and they clearly understand how to kind of, work with each other on these sorts of things. And it makes me, again, wish that Patrick Doyle's music continued more through all the Thor films and the Avengers films because I think that what he did here is just so incredible.
It's a great Thor theme. Yeah. Right. It's such a clear theme, which it seems like it's hard to do.
Yeah.
In modern movies, you don't hear people coming up with as often like, yeah. And this character has this theme going on.
Yeah. Certainly seems to be hard for the people who are scoring the films in the MCU.
Yes. The scores tend not to be the standout.
No. Right. I know. Frustrating.
One shot that for me also really stands out, we're going to just go over like some of the things outside of Thor in a bit, but you're kind of focusing on his journey in this minute, is, Andy and I earlier in our coverage of this have talked about the kind of like, well, what is Heimdall really seeing when he looks down on Midgard? What is Odin really seeing? And I feel like that scene of just the God's eye view looking straight down at Thor as he like looks up, to me, that was very much, I felt like that's what Heimdall is seeing. That's what Odin is seeing. And Thor knows that because he's kind of looking right at them with just this like, how could you do this, screaming out. Is that kind of the sense you get there? So Andy, I know you and I have been talking about that back and forth. Do you think that's what Branagh's going for?
Well, I certainly do. I mean, I think you're thinking of the scream in the next minute, but...
oh, yeah, correct. Thank you.
I mean, he looks up at the sky in this minute.
He does. Yeah, he's kind of screaming up into the sky, but it's more like with the hammer as he's pulling on the hammer. But certainly, like right as soon as he walks in, I mean, we are looking straight down in that God's eye view of Thor as he walks in. So, I mean, certainly, that God's eye view shot is just everywhere in this film. And I have to think that Branagh very deliberately chose to use it. I mean, one, it's just always a cool angle to kind of get that shot, but it does give you that viewpoint from God or some other thing looking directly down. And in the context of this story and these being, quote, gods, I mean, it makes sense. And so I really love the use of that employed throughout the film.
I will say with the God's eye view shot, it does make me want to ask the question, what are these random tanks that are around?
I was about to bring that up. I was going to save it until the end when we got.
It just kind of feels like they tossed in like, I want stuff that looks sciencey. Tanks. Just give me some sciencey stuff around.
Yeah,
we talked about that last week because there
massive hydrogen tanks. It's like, what is that for?
Exactly. Well, outside when he first breaks in, there's like it looks like toxic waste drums, and I'm like, what are they doing here? And
are they trying to melt it with acid?
Yeah, they're like, are they just putting a bunch of different stuff on it to see what happens? I have no idea. So strange.
I've worked in a lab, and like those kinds of tanks, like most of the time they have like some sort of compressed gas, and the purpose is like very, very specific and particular. I can't remember the names of like the pieces of equipment that would basically like they needed those as fuel because they were burning plasma at the temperature of the surface of the sun, so that you could atomize particles out of whatever we were testing. It was a cosmetics testing lab. This is a high end equipment, so we could figure out what's in all of our shampoo, and make sure that it was like quality control for shampoo and toothpaste and stuff. But we had these big machines with these big industrial tanks of hydrogen and oxygen and all of that sort of stuff to run them. And so those are the kinds of tanks that I'm seeing, in this. Right. Why do they need, like, what is this tank for? And it doesn't seem to be like connected to anything. It's like, why is it on the ground next to the hammer instead of in the lab space, which is where it would belong in this case?
Yeah.
So I cannot figure out what the idea would be behind having those tanks, except it's like, make it look sciencey.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I just am still on the kitchen sink idea, because we know that some parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. know that they encountered the Skrulls. We find that out much later and stuff like that. But for the most part, this is their first encounter with something from an alien world. And yeah, I can sort of understand this. Bring everything. We'll figure it out when we need it once we get there. Well, so let's talk about some of the other people and how they're responding. So Barton has that great line, you better call it, Coulson, because I'm starting to root for this guy. What do you think's going on there? What are we learning about Hawkeye? Is it just because he's curious? Is it because he's just is seeing him win and he wants to know what's going to happen next? Why is he rooting for him?
Just that can-do attitude, right? He's going to try and go overcome every odd. We got Thor here, son of a god, and with god powers himself, but pulling himself up by his bootstraps by throwing a few S.H.I.E.L.D. agents around.
Yeah.
It's a strange line though, because I mean he's defeating your own team.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's why is he okay? Is it just because he's so tough and just keeps going? But it's I don't know.
He's just a rebel.
Yeah, I guess it's a strange moment there.
To me, it's kind of two things. One is it is showing Barton is just, already he wasn't oh God, my friends, Thor's beating them up. He's very clearly the loner who is part of the team, but also very apart from the team. But also, I think it's that Greek chorus moment. I think this is the writer trying to be look, you and the audience should be rooting for Thor because even this guy's rooting for him.
Yeah,
I can definitely see that. Maybe a little bit of what the audience should be feeling, and kind of saying Thor is so the audience should be rooting for so much that even his stated enemies have to kind of respect the might of this god that's been stripped of his powers, but he's still this strong.
And then so later he says, last chance, sir, and Coulson says, wait, I want to see this. Is he also just kind of getting caught up in the moment? Is he just the scientist in Coulson's winning out? He wants to know.
I think he just suspects he suspects something is potentially really going to happen.
But play that out. Suppose Thor grabs this, gets the powers of a god, and flies off. Is Coulson fired at this point? Is that his job on the line from this moment of hesitation? Of let's see how this plays out right now.
No, it's great. I watched it happen.
I mean, are you suggesting that Agent Coulson is a tad naive in the face of danger? Because that's certainly not a character trait that we establish about him later.
Well, it's interesting because as it's scripted, the way that it says in the script is as Thor approaches his hammer, Mjolnir starts to glow brighter, blue electricity sparking off its surface. The crackling energy seems to reach out to him. Coulson notices his interest peaked. So they scripted it in a way where there's a very visual thing happening for Coulson to be reacting to and wanting to kind of see what happens. So, I mean, it's interesting the way they play it out because it turns into something where it's just he's really curious, is this guy going to be finally... Because every single S.H.I.E.L.D. agent here has tried to pull that hammer up. They all did, right?
Even though they were told not to. Every single
right,
one.
It's just, I know, I'm taking a break. And then they just kind of reach out and try to wiggle a little bit. And so, and that's, I think, the curiosity thing, where it's just this guy is really determined to get in here. I wonder if they're, what is the reason for that? That determination that Thor has to get to this point. I think, I prefer the fact that it's not this glowing hammer suddenly because he's close to it. I like that it's just, there's something about his journey to get here that has been so determined and for no reason. Who knows that this thing is here anyway? It's out in the middle. I mean, well, I guess all the townies do, obviously. So he could be another drunk townie for all they know. But he's so determined that I think that's what makes him so drawn to figuring this out.
If this is just another drunk townie, I think Coulson should be fired even more.
Right.
I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's there's so much happening in this moment, but I think we've actually kind of hit a lot of the major points. What else from this moment kind of stood out for anybody or other things they wanted to comment on?
There's one last thing for me, which is at around second 54, if you watch it, the Dutch angle starts to right itself a little bit as he's pulling the hammer, and it almost looks like he's pulling the angle back to level.
I got that sense.
Just for a second, it looks as is he starting to impact the tilt a little bit?
I think it's going the opposite way. I think I don't know. Maybe it's just my eyes.
I think
but
maybe
it looks
it like
it's
settles
going
back
backward.
in.
Yeah.
It's just like not, for whatever reason, that one like
That's a
does
cool
shift
moment.
the angle a little bit, but it doesn't come all the way back to level.
I kind of have a similar thought of, and this was somewhat true of the Townies earlier, but we never saw it like this focused. To get that kind of like muscles popping, hey, yeah, he hit the gym a lot the week before the shot, but like you can't fake that. And it makes me really wonder, like, I mean, the prop design for this moment is really well done, because I don't know if they just had like a piece of steel that they just cut and painted to make part of it look like the hammer, or like it's just bolted in very strong. But, you know, for him to be able to pull that much on it and it not move, whatever they did is really incredible. Because I think, like, yeah, if you even just saw like the tiniest bit of movement, just because the prop was moving as this very strong man is pulling on it, the whole thing are you ruined.
Yeah, I think back to like, imagine like a scene in a Star Trek the original series, you know, where Shatner, this thing can't be moved, and he goes over, he's like straining it, and you can just tell like he's not even trying to actually move this thing. This feels like Chris Hemsworth is putting all of his considerable might into attempting to move this.
This has got to be more stable than like 500 pounds, because I'm sure that if it were 500 pounds, it would be shifting. There'd be wiggle.
Right.
You know, not lifting, but like something would be moving. And so this has got to be, I don't know what they must have done to make it
somehow anchored to that ground underneath, you know, somehow.
Yeah. And purely stable, because it's not shifting or moving side to side at all either.
And it's not even the hammer, but like the whole rock structure that it's in. Nothing is moving at all.
Yeah, it's an impressive piece of prop design that I almost feel like we can probably guarantee this is probably sitting like in Feige's in kind of the foyer of Feige's office.
I was gonna say, you walk into Marvel Studios and over there is the hammer that they couldn't actually use ever again because it was welded.
Right. It's a one big thing, one big piece. Absolutely.
Yeah, everyone who comes into Feige's office, like every new director or writer, is like, let me just have a pull. Let me see what I can do.
Absolutely. The only thing that I wanted to say is I really want Coulson to like sniff the air and go, lavender. Like, I feel like that needs to be in this now. It seems like it should be part of the canon.
It's a What If reference for anyone who's not.
I could not place it. I was like, is that from What If? Is that from What If? I can't remember.
Apparently, that's how Thor smells in this moment.
I only watched it once.
Yeah. Wonder if you, Joe, any other kind of last things that you picked up on?
No, I think we were able to hit everything that I wanted to for this minute.
Cool.
Good minute.
Cool. Well, it's been great to have you. For folks who maybe haven't heard Every Minute, for both Andrew and Joe, if people want to find more about you, where can they check out?
I host the Protagonist podcast, and you can find information about that at duelinggenre.com. That's the podcast network that hosts the Protagonist podcast.
And I am hosting Disney Animation Minute Essentials, which is also on Dueling Genre. So in addition to us, you can find a lot of other podcasts through Dueling Genre.
Scott Corelli was just on last week. There you go.
Oh, perfect.
And Andy, I never get to ask this. What about you? Do you do any other podcasts besides this one?
Well, there's The Next Reel, of course, which I mentioned at the start of every show. And, all the shows that spun off of it, like The Film Board and Saturday Matinee and all those shows over there. And, but, I do all sorts of other podcasts producing over True Story FM. So you can find it all out over at truestory.fm.
Yeah, by now it'll be out for a couple months, but if you go back on the Film Board podcast to find the episode about Dune, you can listen to two people who truly understand the art of cinema, barely hiding their disgust that I didn't like the movie Dune. It's a great podcast. You definitely should check it out. So to all of you, thank you all so much. Great to have you on. To our fans, you make this possible. Keep the feedback coming. Let us know what you think. And most importantly, have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.